main floor of boathouses.
Great. Thank you, Chair Bridgman. And I'll try to keep my comments brief on all of these intro items, or all of these items. I know everyone on this committee has read everything already, so we can just cut to the chase as much as we possibly can. So with respect to boathouses, the draft official plan included a policy that basically said the ground floor of boathouses can only be used for the storage of boats and non-hazardous boating equipment. That was the direction provided by Planning Committee. That went out, of course, in the draft official plan, and we asked the question on whether that was acceptable or supportable. And again, we had a split of 51% saying no and 49% saying yes. In looking at this issue and in thinking about it further, and after reviewing all of the comments made, the township already permits boathouses to be used for a whole variety of purposes. If a second story boathouse is permitted, habitable floor space is permitted in that second story. If you only have a one-story boathouse, you can put a sun deck on top of that one-story boathouse. And in addition, in the first floor of a boathouse, you can also have a separate washroom as well in a separate room. And those are as of right permissions from the township's zoning bylaw. And I know, and I've certainly heard through anecdotal evidence, there have been lots of circumstances where folks are converting parts of, or even all of the bottom floor of their boathouses into living space. And I don't think that's appropriate. But I do think that there is the potential to be a bit more flexible in terms of how we approach this issue. And I'm certainly, and what I'm thinking is that we could incorporate policies in the official plan that allows for some recreational floor area in the first story of a boathouse. It can't be habitable, it can't be used for sleeping accommodation, and it should be limited in size. And the working number we have is somewhere between 50 and 70% of a boathouse should be open to the water below. So it's basically being used for its primary purpose, which is the storing of boats. But there could be a consideration for permission in the zoning bylaw for some type of recreational floor area permission in the remainder. I would note if that permission was there, folks may be sitting inside their boathouses more than they're sitting outside of their boathouses, which I think many people would think is a good idea in terms of lessening impacts on quality of life and so on from noise from boathouses. So I'm recommending that there be a change in approach, and that's in recommendation number 2, and that basically the official plan permit recreational floor area on the ground floor of boathouses, provide an appropriate percentage of the boathouse was utilized for marine storage and open to the water below. I don't suggest we put a number in the official plan. I'm very conscious about the many numbers we already have in the official plan, and I don't want to really start adding any more into it if we don't need to. But this is certainly more for the zoning bylaw to consider. But I'm thinking that the door should be open for that to happen. So that's my recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Any comments, committee? Councillor Jaglowitz.
Thank you, Chair. I was afraid no one was going to speak on this issue, so I apologize for going first. Once again, I have extreme difficulty with this. I understand where you're going with it. You don't want numbers in the official plan. But when you say that you can permit accessory recreational use on the ground floor, provide an appropriate percentage of the boathouse was utilized, that you can drive a truck through that. And someone can say, I don't have any boats, therefore an appropriate amount is the entire boathouse. So I think if you're going to allow this, the official plan has to be somewhat stronger. First of all, I'm not sure, I'm surprised that our director of his full title is in agreement with this, because when we dealt with this last week, a similar issue having to do with outbuildings having a designated use, it's my understanding he was opposed to having other than habitable and storage. And now we're going down that slippery slope of creating a middle category called accessory recreational use. So I have a lot of trouble with this. However, I do acknowledge that people should be able to, as some people have said, get out of the sun and you know, have a fridge or something like that. But I think this is very, very, very weak. And I think leaving it to the zoning bylaw is a mistake. So I don't know how we deal with it, but I don't support it in its current form. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Zavitz.
Thank you. It's for you. So, you know, I think as Councillor Jagowitz has just indicated, we struggled last week and we will continue to struggle here today with the word habitable. It's just talk about driving a truck through something. I guess I have two questions. Number one, a general piece, which is if we allow if you will, the construction or the use of the lower level of a boathouse for this application, then where do the boats go? And, you know, it makes me wonder, you know, should there be a fine, have a certain amount of space in your lower level for whatever that recreational piece is, but also, you know, one boat slip, two boat slips. Where do the boats go if the whole space is used for recreation? We end up with problems like we've seen where people put lifts outside and cover, et cetera, or we create larger boathouses to compensate. So, you know, we're just kicking the can down the road. So I'm concerned about that. So I'd like to hear from the committee on that piece. And then I think just generally speaking, I'm going to be in support of some aspect of this, and I've actually changed my mind on it, and that's one of the good things about this process. Lots of hearing, lots of listening, lots of reading, lots of seeing. They're here, and I don't want to seem to be a stick in the mud. People want them. Clearly, they're a vital piece of the Muskoka puzzle. It seems they're going to be. I want to acknowledge them in some way. Thank you.
Mr. McDonald.
Yeah, just quickly in response, we're not suggesting that we support the use of the entire ground floor for recreational floor area. That's not what we're suggesting. I guess we didn't have a number in mind, but if I could throw something out there, it would be no less than 50% of the ground floor being reserved for boathouse, open to the water, marine storage kind of thing. So, I mean, we could consider a number like that. We're just not sure what the correct number is without doing some more testing. So we're not suggesting that. I'm not a big fan personally of habitable floor area. I think it's a challenging term, which could be interpreted many different ways. That's just my view. That's why I looked for something else. And I came up with recreational floor area with a clear prohibition on any sleeping potential or accommodation. I'm also thinking of enforcement down the road. And, you know, when folks are already using the insides of boathouses for all kinds of different things, it's hard to even get into a boathouse unless you have, for enforcement purposes, unless you have some pretty good evidence that something is not happening in accordance with the bylaw. So I'm thinking of enforcement down the road as well, too. So putting a number in the OP is not something I'd support, but if we wanted to consider no less than 50% being used for marine storage and open to the water, we could look at that going forward. So just a thought for the conversation.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hayes.
Thank you, and through you. I've heard the argument that people want to get out of the sun, and I can understand that. What I would like to do is define a little bit better what you can do should you build in part of your boathouse. And that is, it's not a living room. So there should be no television there. There should be no cooking facilities, no barbecue. And anything that you do put in there has to be removed seasonally because of the flooding. So I don't want anything built in. And I would like to stick completely with the two-piece washroom. That's all that we allow in a boathouse, no other plumbing. And if we could do that with a percentage to be determined later, I could support that. But I would like the things that are in there to be removed during our spring freshet.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hayes. So you're including appliances and that kind of thing too, with the built-in kitchens and that kind of thing, right?
Yes, I don't think we should have built-in kitchens in our boathouses. I think the kitchen belongs in the house because that's the use of the house. If you want to bring down some food and have a patio table inside your boathouse and have lunch, that's fine. But or have a mini fridge that's up 2 feet and you know it won't be affected by any flooding, then that's okay too. But anything that is going to sit right on that floor, and that includes built-in kitchens and anything like that, should be removed seasonally to protect our environment.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Mayor Harding.
Thank you. I like the recommendation that is included. I would include a maximum use. I mean, as far as recreational, I'd go to up to 50%. I think that number should be in there. And I look at that like our 11% lot coverage. The specifics later on can be dealt with, I think, in a zoning bylaw, but I don't mind a hard cap on how much of this area could be used. I think that also eliminates, especially if I call it 50% could be used for recreational, as you say, or amenity space, versus the has to be open for a boat slip perspective. I think that 50% also eliminates the case where all of us saw a boat house up on Lake Joseph that was 100% decked in and all the boats were put outside. So I think that eliminates that as we move forward. As far as kitchen facilities and, you know, a sink to get a glass of water or something along that, we're not putting, I don't believe anybody's I've never seen a stove in a boathouse, but when we have a cottage 66 feet back, potentially up a long hill, and people are up and down, I believe a 2-piece washroom is appropriate in the boathouse, but the ability to have some glasses and a bar area and serve, I don't believe is inappropriate. And anybody who's building a new boathouse is building up to a higher flood elevation anyway. And, you know, propane tanks, there's nobody, I've never seen a barbecue inside a boathouse. I don't think you can even legally do that. It's like putting a barbecue inside your cottage. It needs to be outside for ventilation. So I'm not sure regulating kitchens. We have people who build boathouses and call them fish cleaning stations because they want a sink to wash dishes or wash their hands or get a glass of water. Let's call a spade a spade. It's a kitchen, but it doesn't have cooking facilities. And I like where Mr. McDonald's going, that it's not livable, habitable. I couldn't lock myself in this room for a week and live there. And I think that's really where we need to go. Is there a TV in there? Honestly, who cares? It's indoors. I'd rather see a TV inside the boathouse than on the outside wall of the boathouse, which we would technically allow at this particular point. And so I think the policy direction is correct. I don't want to be over prescriptive personally in the official plan, but I would look at a hard cap of 50% recreational space.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, and through you. I like Councillor Zavitz, have moved quite a bit on this, but for slightly different reasons. My general approach on this has been that boathouses are essentially an intrusion on the natural rugged beauty of the Muskoka landscape, and they move development away from the buffer that we've identified as important when we prescribe where people can build habitable space. What has always dictated the basically footprint of a boathouse has been the number of boats and the size of the boats that you're trying to house in it. And if we now decide that you can add or that you can occupy up to 50% of that boathouse, we've essentially doubled the footprint of the boathouse directly over the waterfront for activities that, when we start kind of thinking maybe TVs are okay and maybe kitchens are okay, we've essentially doubled the footprint of the boathouse on or over the water for purposes that have nothing to do with storing boats or marine equipment. Now, here's where I've moved. I don't have a boathouse in my place, but I do recall very clearly when my kids were younger, the boat tied to the dock became recreational floor space. When it was hot, the top went up and they would seek shelter. They'd go in there and have picnics in the boat tied to the side of the dock. So I understand the need and I understand the value of having something like that to escape the heat and the weather and maybe have a nap or whatever. No, you can't sleep, but whatever you do in uninhabitable space. So I've moved a long way, but I have two comments on that. Number one, I guess I care a little bit less about what's in it, except absolutely no partitions. It should be open space. A bathroom, if it's a two-piece bathroom off to the corner, obviously needs a partition. But everything else to me is open space. And number two, the real issue that I have and the real problem that I have is however we prescribe this, we have to be able to enforce it. And I really am tired of the notion that we're going to let neighbors rat on neighbors if behavior changes in one of these spaces. So somehow, and I realize it's not part of the official plan, we got to sit back and figure out if we change our stand and when we change our stand and build this into the official plan, what's the mechanism for enforcement? What's the mechanism for auditing the use of the space, the contents of the structure, and the compliance with whatever we come up with to define recreational floor space? The last thing, I don't know whether it's 50%, 20%, 30%, but no matter what it is, I can't imagine that it should be larger than your ability to build a second floor accommodation. I don't think we need to have party palaces over the water with 2 bedrooms upstairs when you need to go to sleep. I really think there needs to be a much firmer containment. If it literally is an escape from the sun and a bit of a lounge, doesn't need to be 2,500 square feet. It doesn't need to be 2,000 square feet. But I generally support this trend towards recreational floor space with lots of caveats. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nishikawa.
Thank you. I guess it all goes to our own personal experiences. I have experienced where people have pretty much filled in most of the boathouse. Their slips, same thing, put the boats outside, and full-on kitchens, and in fact, sleeping accommodations. While I may not want to sleep in the boathouse that way for a week, how it was described, people are doing it. I also know that some of those people, and that's how I found out about it, they contacted me saying, what's the township going to do about the flooding? They wanted to be reimbursed for the flooding. You know, and I will stick to what more or less what Danelda had said, that I do believe a boathouse is a boathouse. And in fact, I've been successful in communicating with my customers that even perhaps you don't have a 2-piece boat washroom facility down at the boathouse, because there was, during floods and things, it was those plumbing facilities that actually came apart. The plumbing eased apart. I'll just say it that way. And there was no problem. I said most people want to do the best thing possible. They just need to be educated. I think those that have and they want more and more and more, that's a whole different breed. I believe they're a minority compared to a majority, but I don't think we should change our bylaws because of the minority. I think we should stick to a boathouse. Yes, a 2-piece bath somewhere if you want to do it that way. Preferably upstairs, actually, so there'd be some kind of catchment, better. But and yeah, I don't have a problem with someone having a fridge. I have a problem with a kitchen, and there are full-on kitchens. And I have a problem filling in a boat slip because that was not what it was intended to do, and what a boathouse is intended to do. But really, from my perspective, we're talking about people that have large frontages, large boathouses. and a good cash flow. Cash flow is all about this, right, these days. And so I don't know if we're trying to actually squeeze the guy with the small one slip boathouse kind of thing. I don't know where that all fits, but we've been able to we changed our bylaws in the past to allow putting a tent out on the deck. Let's not forget that. Like we put provisions in place for people to get out of the sun. It didn't have to be in the boathouse.
Thank you. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, a lot of good conversation, but I just want to remind everyone that the title of this section is called Boathouse. It's not called Recreation Area. I fully support everything that people have said about getting out of the sun and stuff like that, because, you know, we do it. We have our little umbrella that we put up and been known to get inside the boat to get out of the sun. But this has got to remain a boathouse. Like 50-50 is a ridiculous number. Sorry to say ridiculous. 50-50 is not an appropriate number because it gives recreations the same rights as boats when this is a boathouse. I'm very supportive of a lot of the comments of Councillor Kelly and Councillor Hayes and others that if we're going to do this, it's got to be very, very restrictive. You know, and to underline what Councillor Kelly was saying, enforcement. Now, I don't know whether this is possible, feasible, or allowed, but if we permit this, then you must allow the township to gain entry at any time, probably not permitted, to validate that there are no walls and that X percentage greater than 50 is not covered. And that's my opinion. And I think I look forward to what the public will have to say on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mazan.
Thank you, and through you. I generally supportive or like the creativity that the consultant has brought forward on this one. It's not easy. I have two comments. First of all, I do agree on the percentage. I think that's pretty steep. Having 50% allocated to recreation. So I would ask that we explore, is 50% the right number? My gut is that's pretty high. And these are supposed to be boathouses. The slips are supposed to be there for boats. So I think that's an important number and would ask, well, no, I look forward to hearing what the public has to say. Like generally speaking, some of these docks are fairly large. So I think you could have a larger living space, not to say a living room on the main floor, than we even permit on the second floor. That brings me to my second question, and that is, we don't permit dwellings over the waterfront. The definition of a dwelling, as my understanding, is the kitchen. And the difference between having a little kitchenette and a kitchen is the stove. And I just wanted clarification on that. Is that correct? Because we really do want to be careful, I think, on allowing kitchens. Is that's the term I'm hearing right now on a main floor of a boathouse. I'm supportive. I think every boathouse you would go through Muskoka, old or new, probably has, I will call it the beer fridge. Those are just been kind of an iconic part of the boathouse experience. But having a full-on kitchen, I think, is a really big step. So, and we don't permit them as of right today. So I guess I'm looking for clarification from staff on that.
Mr. McDonald, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I guess, you know, from my perspective, I'm going to invite Mr. Pink to provide his comments on what we envision here. But when we're thinking recreational floor area, I'm personally not thinking full-on kitchens. I don't think that makes a lot of sense. There already is a kitchen in the main house. And if somebody wants to barbecue, they'll do that outside. I can certainly see, as the mayor indicated, another sink, a sitting area, and perhaps even a TV. But that's what we're thinking. The challenge with all of this, and I think you're all aware, is that we can only go so far in telling someone how they can use the inside of any building. And of course, when we dictate how much floor area can be used for one thing and how much can be used for another, that's pretty easy because you can measure that. But when you get into, well, you can't have a TV inside, or you can't have a stove, those are very difficult things to enforce, let alone in an OP, but not even in a zoning bylaw. So there will be some challenges no matter what we do. The issue is that folks are doing this already. And this is happening everywhere. So there is a need for some kind of rule on this issue, or else people will just continue using the bottom floor boathouses in any manner they so choose. So I'm thinking something is better than nothing. Just throw that out there. In terms of full-on kitchens, Mr. Pink, any comments as it relates to habitable floor space in the second story of boathouses and what you can do and can't?
Mr. Pink?
Through the chair, I guess to directly answer Councillor Mazan's question, yes, the difference between a dwelling and a sleeping cabin or non-habitable use is a kitchen, which is defined as the cooking facility. I think as you can see, it is a difficult issue. I think this to really frame it as a significant change from historical practice. We've always in planning documents in Muskoka have considered boathouses to be for the storage of boats and marine equipment. We did try, I think as Councillor Nishikawa pointed out, in our last zoning bylaw update, we added a sun shelter as a permitted use over the dock. There doesn't seem to be any uptake of it, and I think the reason is the way we set up the zoning bylaw. If you want to build a sun shelter, it's going to result in a smaller boathouse, and no one seems to be willing to make that sacrifice because we didn't want to allow greater boathouse sizes or shoreline structure sizes. I certainly, just so councillors are aware of my opinion, I do struggle somewhat with this issue. As Councillor Jagowitz pointed out, we are dealing with a very similar issue on land. We had that meeting on Friday, but I think there are some distinctions here. I certainly never envisioned any kitchens. I think 50% is awfully high in my opinion. I was envisioning closer to 20-25%. And clearly just a interior sitting type area. Really, that's it. I think we're largely seeing it. And the reason I think this is a little bit different than the discussion we had on Friday is because with land-based structures, as much as the zoning bylaw can get creative and say it has to be a garage or for use of cars, there's really no way to control that. But with boathouses, we can clearly stipulate that a percentage has to be open to the water. And that's, at least with a boathouse, easier to see from public property. The lake is a public water body. We have access to it. Most boathouses have large doors, large windows, and it's easier to see that there's in fact open to water. And that's clearly easy to administer through building permits. So as long as there's open water, we know that the entire boathouse won't be used for living space. So what I would suggest, again, it's a very interesting topic. It's a good debate. And as we've seen, it's a large shift from where we've gone. But keep in mind the stage that we're at. We're giving direction to Mr. McDonald, Mr. Diamond, and myself to craft policy, come back to you with a draft. Why don't you let us try to encapsulate the correct percentage, the appropriate restrictions around it. And if it comes back to this planning committee and you don't like it, it's very easy to go back to the status quo, which is boathouses are for boats. So don't want to do wasted work for Mr. McDonald and myself, but let us take a crack at it. That's the recommendation. You will be able to review those policies before we go out and have a public meeting on them. So just a suggestion to perhaps try to park the boat or land the plane, so to speak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pink. Okay, so Councillor Edwards.
Thank you very much, Chair Richmond. I agree with Councillor Roberts. In fact, if you're going to go 50%, why don't we just change the name to a house that accommodates boats? And that is way too much. And that will let the public and that decide what it should be. But I think it should be a footage like 200 square feet, 225, 250, whatever it is. And that we see boathouses completely closed in, and then they put a boat lift outside because the boat gets damaged by the waves. Well, then put it in the boathouse. It's simple as that. And boathouses could be smaller if they were just taking boats. And this is the environment. I thought our strategic plan was saying environment first. So we have to make up our minds on it, but I'm going to let the lake associations and the residents come up with what it should be, but I could not support 50%, or you might as well just call it a house. Thank you.
So I'm going to, before I get to you, Mayor Harding, I agree 50% is far too much in my way of thinking. Committee, are we going to ask Mr. McDonald, Mr. Pink, and to reduce that number when they come back? I am in agreement with Mr. Pink that 20% sounds all right to me. We're talking about just getting out of the sun here, not having a party inside. So can I get some feedback on 20% or 25%? We have. Okay, so we're not sure. So, okay, Mayor Harding, I just thought I'd take a poll before I let you speak.
Thank you. The reason I suggested 50% is if I happen to have a 2-slip boathouse, typically somebody would deck in one of the 2 slips, which is 50%. You know, if we say it has to be 50%, or let's say it has to be 25% only open or closed, we eliminate dry boathouses. And we have dry slip boathouses that have been built around that all of a sudden will become legal non-conforming. So I think Mr. McDonald has the right language that talks about recreational use of this versus a dry slip, because I think that's difficult at the end of the day when we do talk about a dry slip boathouse. So again, if I had 1 slip, not a chance could you deck it in. If I had 2 slips, you know, I'm going to deck in half of my slip. That other slip becomes kind of useless. 3 slips theoretically would be one of the slips would be decked in. And I think that's where people are dealing with the reconfiguration of dock slips and everything else. So I think Mr. McDonald can get to the right conclusion. My suggestion of the 50% was a hard cap on one side, but I'm not going to follow my sword about that. If I've got a brand new sheet of paper and I'm designing a boathouse, I absolutely agree that 25% would be an appropriate number of maximum deck in. I like Councillor Edwards' comments of, you know, there's maybe a square area frontage. We talk about right now 200 square feet on shore. Maybe it's 200 or 300. I'll say 300. If I had a 10 by 30 foot slip, that's 300 square feet of deck area for sitting and lounging inside the boathouse. So there might be another way to deal with it that way.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Savitz.
There we go. Does that work? Yeah. So it's funny. This is a rich man's problem we're all dealing with here. You know, if you're going to have a single slip boathouse and a $200,000 boat, and if you go to buy a boat recently, that's about what you're going to between $100,000 and $250,000. So you're probably going to take care of your boat by putting it in a boathouse. It's only when you have, as the good mayor said, 2 slips or more that this becomes an issue. One would think that 25% of the space in a 2-slip boathouse, you know, I'm fine with that. In fact, I like that number. I might suggest as well that, you know, you need 300 feet, as we all know right now, before we get into the debate later today, about, you know, about properties and size of boathouses and things. So to my mind, you know, you're sitting on a $3.5 to $12 million property to have this discussion. So, you know, we have a lot of those, but I'm not seeing personally yet, but it will come. And so I think we need to be anticipative of that and dial this in. So I think we acknowledge that there's no kitchen for sure, but I think that we can talk about 25% of the space being used for recreational purposes and call it a day. Thank you.
Councillor Kelly.
Sorry, through you. Thank you. Real quick, I don't think we should talk about percentages, because all we do when we try to split it up by a percentage is encourage somebody to build the biggest boathouse they can to maximize the recreational floor space. I think we should turn it around and say, what's the activity we want to legitimize in there? If it's sitting and barbecuing and having a drink, that, you know, that's 20 square feet per person or something. I'd rather have a hard cap in square feet to govern the size of this space than dangle a percentage out there and challenge people to try to find a way to build the biggest boathouse they could to maximize that space. Thank you.
Mr. McDonald, I think you have a comment there.
Yeah, I was just thinking as I was listening to this conversation that I can see there being a cap on the percentage, but also a cap on the actual size. So that someone cannot drive a truck through such a provision and build a pretty large living area. So I'm thinking it'll be two numbers and not one that we come up with to regulate this. I think Jim has a comment as well.
I think he does. Please go ahead.
Thanks. First of all, I'm going to say, let's model it and let you know exactly what works. I've been sitting here doing a sketch and I've drawn 1 million boathouses in my life. I can tell you that a standard 2-slip boathouse, you can build it in 1,280 square feet. So if you build a 1,600 square foot boathouse for some space to do other stuff, that gives you 320 square feet of doing stuff other than storing 2 boats. Seems like a good number, and it's exactly 25%. But we can do some models with 2-slip and 3-slip boathouses and get back when we have that done and respond to council's comments.
Okay, so Councillor Jaglowitz, Mazan, and Edwards, is something new you're adding here? Because I think we're going to talk about this again when it comes back. So Councillor Jaglowitz?
Yes, I'm, as you know, when I first spoke, I was opposed to this. I'm being encouraged by the direction it's going, although I have a couple of suggestions. I agree it should be an amount of square footage, like 200 or 200 or 250 square feet, and that should include everything other than used for boat storage. So that should include the 2-piece washroom too. The other caveat I have, you don't need 2 washrooms in a boathouse. So if it's a 2-story boathouse with a washroom upstairs, it doesn't need one downstairs. So I think if those limits were put on it, I could see that coming forward. I agree with Councillor Kelly. The percentage is wrong. That's just encourage people to build big structures over the water. That's not what we want. Thank you.
Councillor Mazan?
Thank you. Through you, just picking up. I agree. I think we need to have our consultants come back with 2 sets of numbers for us to look at, because that would encourage people to go bigger. 2 other very quick points. I'm not sure it's really important for this point, but laundry facilities shouldn't be permitted on the main level. I think we've seen some recent applicants come forward with that thought, and I just think it needs to be stated in the same way as kitchens. And the second thing that I've seen out there or heard about, I haven't seen personally, are the lifts that come up with docks on them that will then close in an open space. I'm just throwing it out there. Innovation exists. So as we're contemplating this, and it might be in the next stage of development, how to manage that kind of thing from an enforcement standpoint. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. I'll be quick. Right now, we say 50 square feet in a house, in a boathouse. So that's why I said square feet rather than percentages. So I think the consultants can come up with something that is basically the same size as a normal living room or something like that to get out of the sun. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. So Mr. McDonald, I believe you have your direction here, and you are putting on your creative juices here to bring this back to us. So that's great.